Deep in Block Tales' ancient temple lies a prophecy that demands a sacrificial lamb, and when that sacrifice is made, you don't fight a boss. You awaken sleeping gods that have been waiting for you since the dawn of civilization. Today, I'm breaking down every major boss in Block Tales. From the major family drama that transforms Red and Blue Noob from enemies to allies, to Turkey's impossible to dodge gun attack, to the alternate reality super boss that was meant to be a final boss in another timeline, and the 100 HP monster that hits harder than Egyptian gods. Now let's start with a boss that took everyone by surprise. The Ancients. The Ancients represent everything Block Tales has been building toward. This is a confrontation with literal gods that transforms the game from an RPG into cosmic horror about killing deities. The Ancients are the final boss of Chapter 4. They appear when Captain Trotter falls into lava after Calypso pushes him in to protect the player. He becomes the sacrificial lamb foretold in the ancient temple prophecy. But this isn't just a boss fight. This is the awakening of beings that have slept since the dawn of civilization. Now, the Ancients look like a bunch of unconnected shapes, but every element has meaning. The main circle features the Eye of Ra. 6 circles around it show portraits of Egyptian gods: Ra, Horus, Bastet, Sobek, Thoth, and presumably Osiris. You're not fighting a single boss here. You're confronting the collective power of ancient Egyptian deities. Their design actually appears in temple puzzles throughout your exploration, foreshadowing this moment. Here's what makes them really terrifying. They mainly speak in hieroglyphs, with occasional English words thrown in. These are beings from a completely different era. They communicate in ways that predate modern language. It creates this sense that you're talking to something truly ancient and otherworldly. But the Ancients don't just fight you, they psychologically dominate you. Listen to this. The Ancients have hidden stats and HP for 2 turns. For 2 full turns, the screen goes dark and all enemy information disappears. They're literally playing mind games, forcing you to fight completely blind. And once you bring them to half health, they gain Fine and disables NRG for the rest of the battle. They adapt to your strategy. Their signature attack is absolutely devastating. Ultra Beam fires 19 rapid-fire lasers that can end your life instantly. You need Call Griefer on turn 1 with at least 1 defense, or you need at least 2 defense without Griefer just to survive. And because they have the fast passive, they can use both attacks per turn. Their attack pattern goes Wheel plus Beam, then Call for Help plus Fireball, then Ultra Beam plus Darkness, then repeat. The music elevates this fight to epic proportions. Their theme, I'm Your Captain Now by the Recovery System, is the first song in the game with actual lyrics. The lyrics are about betrayal, fire, and pirate terms, all referencing Captain Trotter's sacrifice. Captain Trotter's own theme contains the same melody, creating this musical connection between his corruption and the gods consuming his soul. When you defeat them, they show a grace that's almost more terrifying than their power. They recognize that humans have evolved enough to defeat gods. They thank you for the sacrifice. They mention that Captain Trotter's soul is sealed in the Firebrand forever, and they promise they'll return one day. Even in death, the Ancients are grateful for the sacrifice that brought them briefly back into the world. McCool. Hidden in the desert is the most overpowered enemy in the game, and it's just a guy with a baseball bat who's having the worst day of his life because you accidentally ruined his party in some other timeline. McCool is a super boss you can find south of Vermilion Village after completing Chapter 4. Excluding Tutorial Terry, McCool has the most HP in the game, 100 HP. Let me emphasize this. McCool has more health than the Ancients. These literal Egyptian gods that have existed since the dawn of civilization have less HP than a guy in sunglasses with a wooden bat. That's deliberate design. McCool is a yellow-skinned Robloxian in dark green pants and a purple sleeveless shirt. He wears black sunglasses over another pair of black sunglasses. You can see the second pair when he gets hit. Plus, he's got a purple baseball cap that costs 60,000 Robux in real life. The double sunglasses thing is a reference to Master Chief wearing a second helmet under his helmet. This guy is either incredibly paranoid or incredibly cool. Probably both. But don't let his casual look fool you. His bat smackdown is based on Goro Majima's brutal bat combos from Yakuza 0. If you know Yakuza combat, you know Majima's bat attacks can demolish enemies in seconds. Finn brings that same devastating energy to Block Tales. His bat attacks deal 20 damage with confusion effects, but his combo attacks, that's where things get terrifying. Finn walks up and swings his bat twice, then kicks. These are 3 hits total, dealing 10 damage each for 30 total damage, plus slow debuffs. This is more devastating than the Ancient's basic attacks. But Finn isn't just a damage dealer, he's a strategic commander. He can heal every enemy and himself for 2 HP while giving himself fine and fast buffs for 3 turns. He summons 3 Megaphone Men and Shotgun Blokes, each with 10 HP. Managing these summons while dealing with Finn's relentless attacks creates an overwhelming scenario. His ultimate sequence is pure psychological warfare. Finn does a flip into a cool pose and charges up. On the next turn, he uses Bat Smackdown. You get exactly 1 turn to prepare for his most devastating combo. Here's where the lore gets interesting. After defeating Finn, you get the Converging Timelines achievement. According to his dialogue, Finn was hosting one of the best parties before the player indirectly crashed it in some alternate timeline. Fan theories suggest Finn represents what happens when someone from an alternate timeline meets the main timeline's protagonist. This connects to Block Tales' broader multiverse themes. Both Finn and Supreme Mosquito were planned to be main bosses, suggesting multiple versions of the game where different characters serve as primary antagonists. Here's the beautiful irony though. You spend the entire game building up to fight ancient gods, cosmic horrors, and legendary weapons. But the hardest fight in the game, well, it's against a regular guy with a baseball bat who's having the worst day of his life because you accidentally ruined his party. Hatred. Hatred represents Block Tales at its most psychologically sophisticated. This boss transforms the game from a lighthearted RPG into genuine horror through pure manipulation and emotional warfare. Hatred first appears disguised as Builderman when you enter the dream world. But this isn't just a simple disguise. Hatred is actively manipulating you throughout the entire experience, presenting itself as a helpful guide while secretly orchestrating your psychological destruction. Here's the clue most players miss. At the beginning of the dream world, Builderman's text color is partially red. The game is literally showing you something's wrong from the start. The brilliance of Hatred's design lies in what it forces you to do. You're not fighting random enemies in the dream world. You're fighting manifestations of your own emotions. You fight greed in a maze filled with temptations. You fight solitude while solving puzzles completely alone. These aren't just boss fights. They're psychological challenges that mirror real emotional struggles. But here's the psychological horror. Fear is actually trying to help you. When you encounter fear in the forest, it's literally pointing you away from danger, trying to guide you to safety. But the game mechanics force you to go against fear's guidance to progress. You have to defeat the emotion that's trying to protect you. It's this twisted scenario where self-preservation becomes the enemy of progress. This design choice has sparked extensive community discussion. Many players report feeling genuinely uncomfortable during the Fear boss fight, not because of combat difficulty, but because of the emotional implications. It's a powerful commentary on how personal growth often requires overcoming protective instincts that may be holding us back. After you defeat Fear, Builderman reveals its true form and shows its nature as a being of pure malevolence that's been feeding on your psychological journey. Hatred has 50 HP and uses Earthbound-inspired attacks, including PK Thunder. But its most dangerous weapon isn't physical damage, it's psychological warfare. Hatred's signature move is Charge Outburst, which deals massive damage and can only be survived through specific preparation. You get 1 turn's warning that something terrible is coming, and you have to use the Ghost Walker's special ability to temporarily negate all incoming damage just to survive. What makes Hatred particularly terrifying is its presentation. It's the only boss with its name in all capital letters, shared only with Vlad. It uses Witherstorm sounds from Minecraft Story Mode, creating this oppressive atmosphere where every sound feels threatening and alien. As of Demo 3's release, Hatred has the longest path in Guru's Nirvana. This suggests that confronting your own hatred and negative emotions is one of the most difficult psychological challenges in the game. Captain Trotter. Captain Trotter represents one of Block Tales' most complex character arcs, transforming from ally to enemy to tragic sacrifice in a way that completely goes beyond player expectations. Captain Trotter is a leader of the pirate crew who initially makes a deal with you to collect the Firebrand. He appears as a blocky Robloxian with a classic pirate look, a hook, peg leg, dual cutlasses, and talk like a pirate dialogue. He comes across as a helpful but rough ally who genuinely wants to assist you. He even protects you from his own crew members and serves as a father figure to Calypso after finding her dying in the desert. But the temple has been warning everyone about the Firebrand's cost. The pyramid is filled with hieroglyphics about religion and sacrifice. The environmental storytelling builds a dread throughout Chapter 4, making it clear something horrible is going to happen. Captain Trotter's transformation is gradual and heartbreaking. Once he realizes he's lost all his crew members except Calypso, he becomes aggressive towards the player. The Firebrand corrupts his mind, just like it did with the other bosses. He starts hearing voices, the same corruption that affected the Cruel King and Griefer. This is a recurring theme in Block Tales, suggesting the sword fights in the Height Swords have malevolent influence on their wielders. His combat mechanics reflect his internal struggle. Trotter switches between two stances after taking damage. Let's see your ball get through this. Deflects ranged attacks. Try that there sword on me now, Sharkbait. Blocks melee weapons. This forces you to constantly adapt your strategy, mirroring how unpredictable he becomes. His attacks are devastating and cinematic. His coin flip attack might reference Mortal Kombat or Ultra Kill. He shoots his target 3 times for 5 damage each, or throws and shoots a coin midair for 14 damage. He can toss barrels and inflict damage burn and summon pirate spirits that speak in hieroglyphs, which is very weird. But here's the real horror of how his story ends. After you defeat him, he loses all sanity and lunges at you. Calypso stops him and accidentally shoves him into the lava in self-defense. The sacrifice isn't intentional. It's a tragic accident born from desperation and corruption. Because Trotter becomes the sacrificial lamb foretold in the prophecy, the ancients are summoned. They thank you for his soul before battling you. Captain Trotter becomes the nexus of fate in the ancient prophecy, his soul permanently sealed in the Firebrand. Turkey. Turkey is where Block Tales shows its genius for turning innocent concepts into legitimate threats. Turkey is a mini-boss that the player can encounter in Telemon's Manor, appearing as a rotund brown feathered bird with gray-blue skin, a red neck, and an orange beak. It has ruffled tail feathers and looks like something you'd find on a farm. The design is purposely mundane, which makes what happens next even more shocking. The fight starts innocently enough. Turkey walks up to its target, pecks them, then kicks them with both legs at once. Both hits deal 3 damage, typical early game damage numbers that pose no real threat to prepared players. Its basic attack pattern is Turkey Fury, then Turkey Fury, then Turkey Fury, then Blunderbuss, then repeat, giving you 3 turns to deal damage before things get serious. The Turkey Fury attacks are meant to be silly. The turkey acts like a normal farm animal, using basic physical attacks that match its appearance. Players often underestimate Turkey during these first few turns, assuming it's just another weak enemy placed in the manor for comedic effect. But then, the turkey has had enough. Turkey pulls out a blunderbuss and blasts its target, dealing 12 damage. Ignores dodges, blocks, and super guards. Let me repeat that for emphasis. This farmyard bird pulls out a actual firearm and hits you with an attack that cannot be avoided, blocked, or countered in any way possible. The first time this happens, most players are completely blindsided by the sudden shift from comedy to sudden death. This is one of the few enemies which have an attack that can't be dodged at all. Others, including Tutorial Terry, your bombing pal, Hatred, and Captain Trotter. The Blunderbuss attack was so overpowered that it broke the game's balance during development. Previously, for floor 39 of the pit, it was planned to be 4 turkeys, but this was scrapped due to the Blunderbuss attack being impossible to dodge, block, or super guard, which meant the player only had 4 turns before taking up to 48 damage. Imagine facing 4 turkeys, each with unavoidable 12 damage attacks. That's 48 damage with absolutely no way to avoid it, enough to kill most players instantly, even with defensive builds. The developers had to completely redesign floor 39 because 4 angry turkeys was more dangerous than most final bosses. This balancing issue became legendary in the community, with players joking that turkeys are the true final boss of Block Tales. Turkey having a blunderbuss is a reference to real-life pilgrims. The historical connection makes the absurdity even better. The developers took a wholesome American tradition and turned it into one of the most feared attacks in Block Tales. The blunderbuss used to be able to go through Ghost Potion before it was patched, meaning there was literally no way to avoid damage, making Turkey briefly the most dangerous enemy in the entire game. Green and Purple Noob. Green and purple noobs are a duo boss fight similar to red and blue, but they represent everything toxic about the noob family dynamic. They appear after the bandits in the train cockpit are defeated, and are the first two mini-bosses of Chapter 3. They can also be encountered beforehand as characters in Terratopulus, where their true nature becomes apparent through their interactions with other NPCs. The fight mechanics mirror red and blue's battle, but the emotional weight is completely different. Where red and blue fight together out of love and loyalty, green and purple fight as abusers trying to maintain control over their victims. Their dialogue during battle reveals the extent of their toxicity. That boss of an uncle of yours took you two away from us, and we taught you everything you know. Purple says something like, "How dare you hurt your own father," when you fight them, confirming the abusive parent relationship. But here's what makes them particularly insidious. They genuinely believe they're in the right. They see themselves as wronged parents whose children were stolen from them, completely ignoring the fact that they were pushing red and blue into becoming criminals. This psychological manipulation is unfortunately realistic and makes the fight emotionally heavy for players who have experienced similar family dynamics. According to Green Noob and Purple Noob during Chapter 2, Red Noob and Blue Noob were the last-minute replacements for them as Griefer's minions. This suggests that Green and Purple were originally working directly for Griefer, but were replaced by their own children. The implications are horrifying. They essentially passed their criminal obligations down to the next generation, treating their children as expendable assets rather than family. The battle mechanics reinforce the abusive dynamic. Unlike Red and Blue, who become stronger when fighting together, Green and Purple don't have the same supportive synergy. They fight as individuals who happen to be in the same battle, rather than as a coordinated team. This mechanical difference suddenly reinforces a narrative theme that toxic relationships lack the genuine cooperation found in healthy ones. The battle against Green and Purple isn't just a boss fight, it's a liberation. Red and Blue fight alongside the player to defeat their abusers, finally standing up to years of manipulation and control. When Green and Purple are defeated, Noobador knocks them out, symbolically breaking the cycle of abuse that had trapped Red and Blue for so long. What makes this fight emotionally devastating isn't the difficulty, it's watching children fight back against their abusers while finally having someone, the player, on their side. The universal attack mechanic that mirrors real family dynamics makes this one of the most powerful boss encounters in the game, despite its relatively low difficulty. Many players report feeling genuinely emotional during this fight, particularly those who have experienced family trauma themselves. Community discussions on Discord and Reddit frequently praise this boss fight for its mature handling of abuse themes. The developers managed to address serious family issues without being exploitative or overly graphic, creating a boss encounter that feels meaningful rather than just mechanically challenging. Supreme Mosquito. Here's where Block Tales introduces one of the most fascinating concepts, bosses from alternate timelines. Supreme Mosquito is an optional super boss that requires the player to backtrack with the new iron sword they obtain. Upon being defeated, the Supreme Mosquito will drop the investor card and give the alternate reality badge. Supreme Mosquito can be encountered in the savannah by going behind the exit of the Fire Ant Hill, or by going past the entrance of the Fire Ant Hill, both leading towards the boss's room. She appears as a gray Robloxian-sized mosquito with all the attributes of a normal mosquito, but with a human-looking body and wields a sword. The design is deliberately unsettling, taking a common pest and giving it humanoid intelligence and combat abilities. What makes Supreme Mosquito absolutely fascinating is her origin story. According to Campy, one of the developers of Block Tales, the Supreme Mosquito was originally going to be the main antagonist and final boss of Chapter 2. However, that idea was scrapped, and Griefer instead became the antagonist of the chapter. Her badge description also reflects on this, stating that in another reality, she did indeed become the final boss of the chapter. This isn't just flavor text. Supreme Mosquito literally exists because she's been transported from another alternate reality where she was the main antagonist. The Supreme Mosquito is a minor antagonist and secret boss who is the leader of the mosquitoes that has been transported from another alternate reality. She represents what Chapter 2 could have been in a different version of Block Tales. Her combat abilities reflect her status as a displaced final boss. Supreme Mosquito thrusts her pointy nose at her target, inflicting 8 damage and poison for 3 turns, as well as healing herself for the damage she dealt. The vampiric healing ability makes her incredibly dangerous in extended fights, as she becomes more resilient the longer the battle continues. She's one of the only few enemies that can heal themselves by the damage they deal, alongside regular mosquito swarms and Vlad. Supreme Mosquito summons a single mosquito swarm as backup, but only if there is room for an enemy. Despite constantly flying, she originally didn't have the flying attribute unlike mosquito swarms, though this was changed in Demo 4 where Supreme Mosquito now has the flying attribute. This change made her significantly more difficult to hit with certain attacks, bringing her power level closer to what you'd expect from a final boss. The Supreme Mosquito's presence is foreshadowed by a passive mosquito swarm inside the anthill, where they mention to the player that their queen isn't too far from the hill. This environmental storytelling creates anticipation and makes her discovery feel like a genuine revelation rather than a random encounter. The alternate reality badge description and the fact that she was planned to be the final boss of Chapter 2 creates this meta-narrative where players are literally fighting a boss from a different version of the game. Noobador. Noobador is the final boss the player first encounters at the end of the prologue, and he's far more complex than his simple appearance suggests. Noobador appears as a shirtless noob Robloxian with yellow skin and red pants. He has a default smiling expression paired with neutral eyes, and appears wearing a red mask exposing his eyes and mouth. The mask design is particularly interesting because it suggests he's hiding his true identity while still maintaining some connection to his family. His combat style is surprisingly brutal for an early game boss. Noobador walks up to his target and performs an elbow drop on them, inflicting 3 damage and dizzy for 2 turns. The elbow drop animation is directly inspired by professional wrestling, giving Noobador this larger-than-life persona that matches his role as a crime boss. But his signature move is a super ball attack. Noobador throws a purple super ball in a curved arc, inflicting 3 damage and defense down level 1 for 2 turns. The Super Ball mechanic is particularly clever because it forces players to learn about positioning and timing early in the game. The curved trajectory means you can't just stand anywhere, you need to understand the attack pattern to avoid it consistently. The Super Ball was formerly a dark purple before randomly getting changed to red once the release of Demo 4, though the developers haven't explained the reason for this change. What makes Noobador fascinating is his role in the family drama. He's Red and Blue's uncle who serves as their boss in the criminal organization. But unlike what you might expect from a crime boss, Noobador genuinely cares about his nephew and niece. When the truth about Green and Purple's abuse comes to life, Noobador apologizes to the player for misunderstanding the whole Shedletsky situation, explaining that Red and Blue are good people at heart, but are sometimes difficult to understand because their parents endorsed being criminals on them for years. This adds layers to Noobador's character that most players don't expect from an early game boss. He's not just a generic villain. He's a family member trying to protect his nephew and niece from a toxic situation while running a criminal organization. The moral complexity here is impressive for what appears to be a simple Roblox-inspired RPG. Noobador's defeat pose is a reference to Peter Griffin's death pose, making him the first character to use this now iconic animation. This is the first time the Peter Griffin death pose appeared, with other cases being a generic Loyal Knight, the Kitchen Wizard, and both Bigfoot and Griefer's sleep animation. The Peter Griffin reference has become a running joke in the Block Tales community, with players specifically looking for this death pose in subsequent boss fights. The lore around Noobador gets even deeper when you consider the pre-prologue sequence. Red Noob and Blue Noob are found looking at a grave, and since they have a close relation with Noobador, it's likely he had died in some previous timeline or iteration of events. This connects to broader timeline manipulation themes that run throughout Block Tales, suggesting that the story we're experiencing might not be the first iteration of these events. Fighting him multiple times in Nirvana will result in his dialogue being different each time he is interacted with. While initially still hostile towards the player, he eventually comes to realize that the player came for a noble cause, which is to collect all the swords for Shedletsky. This progressive dialogue system shows how even antagonists can develop more nuanced understanding of the player's motivation over multiple encounters. Red and Blue Noob. When you first encounter Red and Blue Noob in the prologue, they appear as straightforward antagonists working for the mysterious Griefer. Red has 7 HP while Blue has 6 HP, and they're found ganging up on a beaten up Shedletsky outside of Roblox HQ. At this point, they seem like typical minion enemies, aggressive and completely hostile toward the player. Their base attack deals only 1 damage, but here's the plot twist. They both get attack up level 1 if the other is defeated. This mechanic encourages you to take them both down simultaneously, or to at least take blue out first. This design choice is brilliant because it forces players to think strategically while subtly establishing the emotional connection between the characters. What makes red and blue special isn't their combat prowess, but their character development. According to Noobador in Chapter 3, despite the duo initially appearing as antagonistic, he reveals that they have good intentions at heart. They're not evil by choice. They're victims of circumstance, forced into a criminal lifestyle by factors beyond their control. The community reaction to Red and Blue's character arc has been overwhelmingly positive, with many players on Reddit citing them as one of the best examples of redemption arcs in modern Roblox games. Their transformation from enemies to allies feels earned because the game takes time to establish their motivations and relationships. The real revelation comes in Chapter 3, when Red and Blue show up to thank the player for defeating their abusive parents. As a token of their appreciation, they give the player the Call Red and Blue card to summon them in all future battles. The card allows them to act as a singular entity with 8 HP, with +2 for every level the summoner has, and they gain the double turns attribute, letting them attack twice per turn. The summon card mechanics make Red and Blue incredibly powerful allies. Red and Blue will rush over to the opponent, with Blue sliding to the floor and propelling Red towards the enemy, inflicting 3 damage. This animation perfectly captures their teamwork and shows how their bond makes them stronger together than apart. These boss patterns are really just surface level. The real secret is understanding the hidden calculations and status effect interactions that let you survive attacks that should one-shot you. The combat system has layers of complexity that most players never discover. From specific card combinations that can make you invincible to timing windows that let you counter seemingly unavoidable attacks. Check out every Block Tales Boss Lore Part 1 to learn the advanced strategies and hidden lore connections that separate casual players from Block Tales masters. Trust me, once you understand how the Firebrand's corruption mechanic actually works, you'll never look at these final bosses the same way again.